Recently, I got a donation that came with a question from a man I'll call Mike. Can you do maybe some stuff on what to do in a normal relationship, he asks. I mean, I get it. Ditch crazy bitches, say no, etc. But as you say, we like to do pair bonding, and I sometimes think I want a partner. I mean, problems are real, he says, and women do have valid problems, which they maybe communicate not that well through emotions, etc. But I think I'll actually care about her problems, right? If, let's say, I have that grown-up woman. Or you think at the moment it's more important to wake men up. Thanks for that, Mike, and it's not by any means the first time I've had questions like these. And to be honest, I've attempted to answer them in bits and pieces scattered throughout a lot of my talks. However, this does deserve an attempt at thoughtful, dedicated answers put into one place. So now I'm thanking Mike for both the donation and the impetus to do this talk today on how to have a normal relationship with a woman. And with that, the first thing that I have to say is that if you want a relationship with a woman that works for you, it better not be a, quote, normal one, because normal relationships for men are a shit sandwich, life on a leash that makes you prone to misery. If you're red pill, you want normal about as much as you want a bad case of diarrhea. Not wanting to get bogged down in semantics, though, I'll move on, assuming that what Mike really means is how to develop a workable relationship with a woman once you call out the pathologically hypergamous bitches and other losers. How do you handle their needs in a relationship? And how do you distinguish between what's legit and what is simply childish bullshit? And how do you handle either one? With that, I'll cut to the chase and start where it matters most, with you. That's the most critical part because the kind of woman you pick is less important in this process than the kind of man you are. And I'm talking specifically about some key elements of your personality, your applied knowledge, and your personal values, not to mention your willingness to have and maintain a good relationship with your balls. We can break all this down into 3 parts. First and foremost, start by dealing with your family of origin issues, in particular, your relationship with your mother. Motherhood, as we know it today, is pretty much synonymous with emotional abuse. Mothers raised in the age of female entitlement, rampant hypergamy, and victim ideology renders most of them unfit as parents. And if my saying that raises your ire, if it offends you, like I just insulted something sacred, then you really need to deal with your mommy issues because your life and thinking are dominated by unhealthy fiction. Since the Industrial Revolution, which took much of the masculine presence and influence out of the average home, boys have been used as surrogates, emotional husbands to needy, isolated women. In many cases, fathers are cast into the role of mostly absent enforcers, whose presence in the home is defined by protection, provision, and muscle for the mother's will on the children, regardless of how petty or abusive she may be. Just you wait till your father gets home. The original mantra for proxy violence for women. Oh, and by the way, that would be an enforcer father who got his training by being similarly bullied and abused in his childhood. His bullying on behalf of the mother is a duty he sees as natural and righteous, even though in reality it's sick and dysfunctional. So in that light, in and of itself, the normal arrangement is an abusive arrangement, and that is just counting the families where the father is there at all. In many more, the father has been removed, and his muscle has been replaced with the mother's ability to rule by inflicting psychological and physical abuse. Combine this with a system of early education dominated by women, most of them ideologically and emotionally unsound, and you have legions of men who are dominated by women in crucial early years of development. We've been trained by them to not only please women, but to be wholly dependent on their approval. We see that expressed all the time in how blue pill men become so obsequious and servile to the women in their lives. For every man who just can't say no to a woman, which is most of them, I can point to an abusive mother and a weak or absent father. And again, I remind you not to fool yourself. This is normal, the very definition of normal, which is why if you're smart, you'll work steadfastly on deprogramming yourself and going for abnormal. Facing this mother dominance and breaking free of it is step 1 in the process. Without it, there is no step 2. Freedom from the abusive control of women is dependent on freedom from the abusive control of our mothers, as well as rejecting the weakness of our fathers. Note, this is not to demonize mothers or fathers. To beat the dead horse a little more, abusive parenting is normal in this society. It's the standard. Some would say the gold standard. But of course, the more awake we become, the more conscious, the more we see that what's normal is the problem. Rejecting unhealthy norms is not the same thing as rejecting our mothers and fathers. Once you face all this and reject the role of sycophant in its entirety, the next step is to disabuse yourself of any notion of romantic love. For more on this, I've linked below to a couple of talks I've done. One is Chasing the Dragon, a talk I co-authored with Peter Wright, and which I call the most important talk on this channel, and another talk titled Why Romantic Love is a Farce. It's really hard to overstate the importance of this. When you combine the force of men's programming to please women with the neurochemical insanity induced by infatuation, you get a world-class setup for the life of abuse and exploitation that romantic chivalry imposes on all men foolish enough to live by its dictates. It's the blue pill edicts of if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, and happy wife, happy life. Those are the rules that will stick after the infatuation fades. More accurately, those are the rules that will stick right in your back like a prison yard shank. Lose sight of that, even for a moment, and you're lost. Always remember that love has nothing to do with infatuation or romance. The common myth is that mature love grows out of infatuation. That's bullshit. Mature love, when it actually happens, does so in spite of romantic love. It happens for those who survive the stupidity of infatuation and who endure the bitter disappointments that infatuation always engenders. Infatuation and romance are temporary illusions, storybook bullshit, and nothing more. Love, I believe, is absolutely real, but it's reserved for adults with agency who put the work into it. It's not for squawking toddlers who think love means being the center of the universe. And it certainly doesn't mean that if mama ain't happy, she gets to punish everyone within reach. That's a model for sadists and masochists. I cannot overemphasize the importance of this matter of intense work in your personal development, and that requires yet another element of red pill awareness. The sugar and spice narrative about women has led to the destruction of many men. If you don't do your own personal narrative busting, you will probably end up as one of them. Consistent with our socialization via cultural gynocentrism, we have a fatal tendency to view women in the sugar and spice and everything nice model. We literally train ourselves to not see that some women, many actually, are more like black widows than they are sugar and spice, perfectly happy to cannibalize the male after mating. They just do it a lot slower. And we certainly tend to look away from the fact that every woman, no matter how nice or wholesome on the surface, has the distinct capacity to play the black widow role. And as we all know, the state is complicit in this arrangement as well, arming women with fangs and venom with the help of family courts and a marked indifference to false allegations. So, a very important point here, In your pursuit of a so-called normal relationship, you are not looking for that unicorn, the woman who rises to meet the sugar and spice narrative. You're not looking for the exception to the rule who can provide you lasting romantic love. No woman meets the standard, and those who appear to are the most dangerous women you'll ever meet. As a matter of fact, if a woman meets your perfect idea of a romantic partner, a lover who always sees the best in you, who is eager to weigh in on your side, and who paints a halo around your head, you better find yourself running. We have another name for these women. It's called personality disordered. That woman is just a borderline, and she's love bombing you. When the party's over, she'll maul you in front of your own children with a smile on her face. Ignore what I'm saying at your own peril. Now, let's assume that you have dealt with your family of origin issues, you brought yourself up to speed on the romantic chivalry trap, studied hard on hypergamy and gynocentrism, destroying any notion of little girls being sugar and spice. And you've gifted yourself with a spine, the ability and the complete willingness to say no to a woman anytime it suits you, and to say get the fuck out when it suits your purpose as well. In other words, you got your red pill script and took the whole bottle just to be sure. Well, first of all, I'll say congratulations. At this point, you are more woke than 99+% of men are, ever have been, or ever will be throughout the course of human history. And let's say that despite being firmly red-pilled, you want to pursue pair bonding with a woman. That is a perfectly reasonable position to take, and even if it weren't, most men would take it anyway. Men, red pill men included, are generally wired for pair bonding. You can not like that shit all you want, but you can't make it not true. So the question becomes, now what? Now that you've put your image of women in the right place and, more importantly, begun living life with your own well-being at the center, now that you've prepared yourself and improved yourself to the point that you know you can hold your own, emotionally and psychologically, with any woman, how do you take that into a bond with a woman that is worth your time in the days ahead? I'm going to cover that in part 2 of this series. But I want to remind you first that what I've said here in part 1, that's the part that matters. If you noticed, everything I'm saying here is about what you see in the mirror when you look into it. It's not about her qualities, her values, her beliefs, her anything. It's about you. Another fantastic difference between feminism and the MRM. It's called understanding that you are responsible for everything that happens in your life. There are no victims, just volunteers. Our beliefs and our choices dictate how our lives will end up. And we'll take that very important thought into the next part of this talk, where I discuss how men can comport themselves in selecting and bonding with women. And that is it for this talk. I'll be back next time with part 2. As always, I hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't, and we'll see you next time. Hi guys, I am back with part 2 of my series entitled How to Have a Normal Relationship with a Woman. In part 1, we already covered the fact that normal isn't what most men want or need, and a matter of fact that a normal relationship is the gateway to red pill thinking. And I don't mean that in a good way. Normal is FUBAR. And even if we want a long shot at creating a serviceable relationship with a woman, we've got to think and operate outside the dysfunctional box. And I suppose in starting here, I should cover a couple of things that I didn't mention in part 1. First, I have to assume that everyone listening to me knows I am not suggesting under any circumstances that any man marry any woman or that he ever make himself legally vulnerable to her via common law or any other legal device. Whether or not a woman ever pulls the trigger of the gun that the state puts in her hand or whether she ever would is irrelevant. There's no such thing as a fair, functional relationship when one party has the brute force of the state behind them and the other doesn't. Functional doesn't include having a sword dangling above your head by a string that your partner can cut anytime she gets the urge. After all, what thinking, self-respecting human being would enter a relationship under those conditions? Also, please keep in mind that I'm not suggesting or encouraging that anyone should be in a committed relationship. This is very much an I report, you decide proposition. My views are offered knowing that most men are going to opt for relationships in one form or another, but that your choices are none of my business. That addressed, I remind you that in part 1, I stressed the fact that I approach all of this as an inside job for men. We assume that there are no unicorns out there, no perfect woman whose nature and personality will immunize you from gynocentrism. So we enter this realm aware that it's on you to handle these things like a values-driven boss, not depending on women to modify their behavior without your taking a somewhat rigid, principled stand. The best way to start making yourself that boss is to shore up your family of origin issues, particularly with mothers, to ditch the concepts of romantic love and modern chivalry, and to unsubscribe from the outmoded, insanely erroneous narrative that girls are sugar and spice, and therefore above judgment. Hopefully that will push you should you decide to engage with women to approach every relationship with a set of values and willingness to let her go the moment she reveals that she can't or won't be trained to respect them. If you think the phrasing here is insulting to women, get over it. We all train each other in how we're treated. Your values, and importantly your allegiance to them, will determine your effectiveness as a trainer. How you perform when challenged by a woman to live by those values will tell you everything about you that you need to know, which is another way to say that doing this will prove whether your values are really your values. All that said, if you have checked all the boxes leading up to this moment, if you set yourself on the course straight and steady to a path in life that won't be altered by gynocentrism, then you are ready to see how that plays out in relationship life. And the best place to start in that is with what I will call a feminine certainty. Notwithstanding all the Nawalters out there and all the women who will swear falsely before the gods that they are the exception, there are obstacles you will encounter with virtually any woman you might select for pair bonding. Note, I did not say some women, or a lot of women, or even most women. I'm saying all women, every last one of them. The anti-generalization police can piss off. I am not altering my language based on the possible existence of a unicorn population best measured in parts per million. Any woman you engage, even anti-feminist women and even women who claim to be anti-gynocentric, are going to challenge you with gynocentrism. That, my friends, is carved into granite. They can't help it. It is part of their nature just as naturally as the gynocentrism that you've had to work hard on overcoming in your own personality. Blaming women for that is pointless. It's like blaming them for being human. That note in particular should resonate with any man who calls himself red pill. We are used to people demonizing our natural inclinations, and I don't think it works any better for us than it has for feminists. This doesn't mean to cut slack to gynocentric women, not in the least, but it is a heads up on the benefits of emotional detachment and refusing to paint yourself as a victim. As I said in part 1, no victims, just volunteers. That means we don't have to anymore get angry at women for being gynocentric than we have to get angry at a man for his eyes lingering on a woman's tits. It's just what they do. It's on you whether it wrecks your life. How you intervene on all this with a woman can be complicated. We are talking about a wide range of human interactions that express gynocentrism in a myriad of ways. It can be subtle or overt, in your face or sneaky as hell, but it is going to come up regularly. With any relationship you have with any woman that involves sex and commitment, one thing you can count on is that somewhere in her core beliefs is the unshakable certainty that she is supposed to have her way about things. She may not be conscious of it. She may even claim that she's nothing like that she's all about sharing and equity and fairness. All I can say is that just because she believes her own brainwashing doesn't mean that you have to. Count on the fact that with enough time with any woman, you will see an increasing tendency to co-opt control of how money is spent, including your money, of all manner of entertainment, of where you spend holidays and who with, of the look and feel of the home if you share one, of friendships and free time activities, even of which relationships with family members are valued and which ones are cast aside. That kind of control is ultimately at the core of every woman's will, even if she doesn't know it, even if she doesn't know that she doesn't know. And left unchecked, it will invariably result in the stifling domination of your life. This can make for tricky ground in a realm where compromise is also very important. And all I can tell you at this point is to trust your gut. Gynocentrism is like porno, very difficult to define, but you damn well know what it is when you see it. When in doubt, say no. Unless you're a mirror version of a completely gynocentric woman, you're still, as a man, more likely to not say that enough than you are to say it too much. In fact, if you've been following my work for any length of time, you know I've long suggested that men bloody well find something to say no to early in a relationship, and that they pay very close attention to what happens when they do. That is where the values-based approach goes from theory to practice. When you tell a woman no, you only want to ask yourself one thing about her reaction to hearing that forbidden word. And that is she vindictive about it? Please listen to this part very carefully. A vindictive woman should be a gone woman. And I mean no matter how slight or limited her retribution is. Notice, I did not encourage you to ask yourself if she was disappointed or bothered by your no. I encouraged you to observe and ask yourself if she was vindictive, even in the slightest way. And if she is, it's time for her to go. Seriously, if she can show the slightest hint of vindictiveness early on during the brain's fireworks of infatuation, what do you imagine it will be like when she hates you? You see, the vindictiveness crossroads is the one that counts. How she reacts to your addressing your own needs will tell you who she'll be for however long the relationship lasts. She is telling you whether she can handle a no or whether she's suiting up for the battle for your soul. And guys, she'll almost always be doing the latter. When you say no to her and you hear her say, "Fine," in that tone that assures you payback is coming, you don't have to bother waiting for the payback. Your applied values could reasonably send her packing right there. Or if you later hear a no from her and you know in your heart that it was retaliatory, that she just said no as payback to your saying no about something else, it's the same exact result. Gynocentrism is unavoidable and in every woman's DNA. Vindictiveness, while affecting a lot of women, is not a given. And where there's no vindictiveness, there is more hope for a durable relationship. Hope, that is, depending on whether you've still got your balls and your willingness to use them. I don't often do this, but I can use my personal life as an example of what I mean. I'm 16 years into a sturdy, trusting relationship. That didn't happen because my partner isn't gynocentric or because I've never had to draw lines in the sand on hypergamy and maintaining my own autonomy. We've clashed on those very things a number of times, sometimes bitterly. But after the first year, which included a few near breakups, I noticed one thing stood out about her. There was never any vindictiveness, no payback, no casual expression of the word fine that I knew would later turn into an attempt to punish me for having boundaries. No moves to take or harm anything that was mine. We've fought, mind you, on many occasions. And the truth tell, we'll fight again. That's the nature of this beast, and I'd be the last person on earth to fault any man for just shrugging it off and deciding that it was not worth his time. But I would also be far less than honest to say that it has not been worth my time. It has, and then some. Like I've said about 1,000,000 times now, most men aren't wired to fly solo. There are benefits to functional relationships for men. Even most MGTOW monks take their path as a pragmatic solution, a common sense reaction to the shithole that life can become with the average woman, not because they wouldn't want a woman if it made more sense. To return one last time to Mike's question, which started this discussion, what does it take to have a normal, or rather functional, relationship with a woman? And of course, the answer turns out to be mainly about being a functional man. There are some loose ends to this conversation that I have yet to cover, some tips and techniques that I think can help a great deal in selecting women and managing them once the choice is made. I'll be covering that in the third and final part of this series in my next talk. I have to close today with a few words directed at my supporters at Makers Support. Unfortunately, that site has fallen off the rails functionally. I cannot process payments from my supporters there anymore and can't even get the guy who owns the site to respond to my inquiries about it. I think he had good intentions, but I also think he bit off more than one geek could chew in trying to make his idea work on his own. So with that, I'm terminating my account with Makers Support and asking my supporters to please either return to support me on Patreon or to try and use any of the links below to start a subscription to my work via PayPal. And while I'm at it, I want to remind you that you too can help ensure the work I do keeps coming by becoming a patron through the link below. I meet with all my patrons who want to on most Saturdays, and you are welcome to attend those meetings with Patreon support in any amount. You can also support me with a subscription or one-time donation through the links below. All donations in any amount are greatly appreciated. As always, guys, I hope you've enjoyed the talk today, even if you haven't, and we'll see you next time. Hey guys, time for my third and final installment on the series How to Have a Normal Relationship with a Woman. And of course, I've asserted, despite the clickbaitish title, that cultivating something functional with a woman requires you to be anything but normal. And so far, it's evident that that path isn't just unconventional, it's also quite complicated. So complicated, in fact, that it can make you question the value of that pursuit. Now, by the end of this third part of the series, I am going to assert that it is more than worth the effort, though for reasons that aren't going to be apparent immediately. More on that later. For now, let's recap the first two parts by repeating yet again the idea that this has almost nothing to do with, quote, handling women. It's not about game or other forms of petty manipulation designed for men who don't have the spine for a values-driven life. It is about living in a manner where your values protect you because they preclude you from accepting the wrong kind of woman and the abuse that is certain to come with her. We started the discussion of this way of life with a call to deal with family of origin issues, especially how those issues apply to our relationships with our mothers, and subsequently all women. From there, we moved on to the need to disabuse yourself of romantic love and miscalled chivalry and to dispense with the sugar and spice illusions we create about women and their nature. In short, I've called upon you to reject many of life's illusions and embark on a path that forces you to deal with reality. I've done my best to stress pragmatism over emotionalism, the idea being that being angry at women for their hypergamous gynocentric nature is about as sensible as women being angry at men for liking tits and ass, or in other words, for men's gynocentric nature. If you don't like the nature of men or women, you can take it up with God, or Darwin as you please. But anger at either as a class is purely irrational. It's the way of feminists, and I've yet to see that sort of thing pay off for men at all. Finally, the dead horse I've beaten the most in this series is the fact that handling all of these issues as a competent adult with agency is on the individual. Participating in relationships is voluntary. So is participating in abusive relationships. And even more brutally, I firmly believe that most every man's story of being ruined by a woman contains a common denominator. At some point, there was a decision to accept abusive treatment and unfair standards. The inevitable ruin that came with it was just the chickens coming home to roost. The choice to stay with and or be exploited by the wrong woman may be a decision based on ignorance, and it may be a decision made under duress. Usually it's a choice based on generations of cultural conditioning and a lifetime of socialization, but it was no less a choice. Focusing on that is the difference that makes the difference. Accountability, not victimhood, is the doorway to healing and to freedom. Not to mention the fact that owning our choices without reservation is the only surefire way we have to avoid making the same mistakes again. No victims, just volunteers. Own that, and you own your life. And once you get that, you're left with two possible solutions. One, avoid relationships with women altogether, a completely understandable solution. And then there's the harder road of taking full responsibility for overcoming your own gynocentrism and your culturally inculcated weakness with women. Then taking that strength into a values-centered approach with women that will cull most of them out, but theoretically at least will leave men who operate with a spine with the possibility of a functional relationship. There are not a great many techniques or special tips to be had here. After all, this approach is completely reliant on your values and having the balls to live by them, even if it means you have to watch a woman you're infatuated with gather her shit and walk out without looking back. Functional living is occasionally painful. The cost of freedom is grief. But there are a few tidbits to consider which may be helpful in your taking a shot at training a woman into being capable of a functional relationship. First, take your new insights from sorting your family of origin issues and apply it to looking at her family of origin. What's her relationship with her father like? How does her mother treat her father? Is there chaos in her family or order? Pay close attention to how the family communicates with each other, or, even more importantly, how they don't. The reason for this is simple. Whatever her family is like, she's going to try to recreate that with you. Watch her family very, very carefully and think about that. Also, typically, you'll find that the more physically attractive a woman is, the higher maintenance she's going to be. That doesn't mean that a 5 is half the work of a 10, But you should always keep in mind that very, very attractive women have had men kissing their asses their whole lives. They are used to adulation and deference, and sooner or later, they'll expect that of you. When dealing with a 9 or 10, you can safely assume that constant in the back of her mind is the certainty that she can drop you and have a dozen cucks jumping out of the woodwork, roses in hand, by snapping her fingers. And the fact is, she can. Also, 9s and 10s run higher risk of personality disorders, or at the very least, the traits. Check below for the link to my talk on spotting borderlines. Watch it till you know it by heart. Find out if she can take a no, and find out early. This can be a challenge, especially if you're infatuated and can't imagine saying no to anything where it concerns her. But that's your job here. Find something to say no to, and then stick by it. Do that in the first month or so, and she will tell you right then and there what kind of person she is. Any hint of vindictiveness on her part can be multiplied by 100 after the infatuation wears off. Multiply it by 1,000 as the relationship starts to wind down or when it hits the rocks. Her endearing peccadillos when you're infatuated will become malignancies when things get rough. Vindictiveness is the worst of those things. It's where false allegations come from and all other manner of abuse. This is all part of the master effort on your part. ABS, brothers. Always be screening. Your job, should you choose to accept it, is to look for a legit reason to ditch her constantly and to act accordingly when she gives you one. Again, this is a tall order when the chemicals in your brain are turning it into romantic mush, but failing to do it comes with assured consequences. Now, I know at this point all this is sounding harsh, and to be truthful, it is harsh. Not near as harsh, though, as the 10,000 nightmares that can happen if you don't stay on guard. Forming a relationship is supposed to be a fun, exciting time. It's supposed to be about being open to trust and practicing forgiveness for the venial human sins that we are all so capable of committing. And it is about enjoying the positives that relationships can and do bring to life. And if you've chosen well enough, you have a shot at those things, provided you don't lose sight of your values. Oh, and by the way, I'm assuming in all this that you have your own house in order. After all, if your character is lacking, so too will your values be. But I have no advice for men of poor character, except to say that for good reason, men shouldn't trust you any more than they should trust the wrong woman. Now, here's the kicker. There's a great deal of value in all of this that has very little to do with women. Defining your values, living by them, sorting out your family of origin issues, rejecting the bullshit of romantic love and chivalry, believing with conviction that you won't be subjected to abuse, that you're not a step and fetch or a servant, screening the people you allow in your life and screening out the ones who don't enrich your life, bringing your balls and spine with you everywhere you go. All these things will do you a hell of a lot more good than Jordan Peterson telling you to clean up your room, and they will enrich and improve your life beyond measure, whether you ever have another woman again or not. So if you do all this, and the price of it is being alone, you will be less alone than you've ever been in your life. That's what a meaningful relationship with yourself can bring. And of course, that was the entire purpose of all 3 parts of this series of talks. Matter of fact, that's the entire purpose in my work, top to bottom. Men get lost and wasted in relationships with women because by the time they're old enough to connect with women, they've had any notion of a relationship with themselves beaten out of them by the world they live in. The best thing that working on relationships with women in this way does for men is put them on a path of shedding all the garbage that has been heaped on them from the day they were born. It's a proving ground for red pill life for men. It gives you a way to grow and strengthen that isolation can never give you. If you end up with a functional relationship with a woman you care about, that's great. It's fantastic. But even if you don't, it doesn't matter. In the end, you're the only person that matters in this at all. A stronger, better version of you is worth the effort. And that is it for this talk. As always, I hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't, and we'll see you next time.